Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are staring down a real paradox in the clean energy sector. We're talking about Enphase Energy, a company that was, just a couple of years ago, the absolute darling of Wall Street, trading more than $400 a share.
Yeah.
And today, battered by, all these economic headwinds, it's trading about 80% below that high. Right now it's sitting somewhere around, $37?
And that extreme divergence is really the core of our discussion today. The market is pricing Enphase like a distressed hardware company. It's been punished really severely by high interest rates, and then that regulatory hammer that dropped in California, then EM 3.0. And this isn't just like a tough quarter. We are looking at a structural consolidation. The whole residential solar industry is going through it.
So our mission today is pretty simple. We need to figure out if this distressed price is fundamentally mispricing their long-term technological edge. We're doing a deep dive into the big question, is Enphase actually making the switch?
Yeah.
Are they moving from that, hyper-growth valuation to becoming more of a mature industrial tech compounder?
And looking at that pivot to commercial solar and software.
Exactly. Okay, so let's unpack this. We have to start with their foundation because you really can't understand the opportunity without understanding the tech that sets them apart.
Right. And they're not just selling a box, they're selling a whole decentralized system architecture. Their main competitors, the market leaders like SolarEdge, they use what are called string inverters.
That's the one most people probably picture. You see that big rectangular box on the side of the house and all the panels feed into it.
And that system is, it's vulnerable. You often hear the analogy of the Christmas light effect. String inverters connect all the panels in a series. And that runs high voltage DC power. We're talking 600, sometimes 1,000 volts across your roof and down into that one box.
So if one panel gets shaded or covered in leaves or just fails,
the output of the entire string degrades. It drops down to the level of that weakest link. It's a massive single point of failure.
And that is where Enphase really revolutionized the market with a microinverter. But, revolutionized is a strong word. Aren't microinverters still just more expensive up front than a string inverter? Why wouldn't installers stick with the premium Enphase product when others are undercutting them on price?
And that's the fundamental debate, right? The answer is always total system value, not just the upfront cost. The Enphase approach, their revolution, was to put a small inverter behind every single panel. So the power conversion from DC to low voltage AC, it happens right there at the source.
Okay.
And that does two things that, that justify the premium: resilience and safety.
Resilience, meaning the decentralized system. If one panel goes down, the rest just keep cranking out power at peak efficiency.
Correct. But the safety part, especially for installers and, first responders, that is non-negotiable. Converting that dangerous high-voltage DC into low-voltage AC right on the roof, it just minimizes fire risk.
That's right.
It's often favored, sometimes even required, by local codes.
And then there's the data. I know their systems generate this incredibly granular panel-level performance data. Why is that data so important?
Well, it creates huge savings on the maintenance side. Since every panel has its own logic chip, installers don't have to send a technician out what they call a truck roll, which is expensive, just to figure out which panel is failing.
So they can just check it remotely.
They can run remote diagnostics, pinpoint the problem, and a lot of times fix it without even going out. Or at least they only send a technician when they absolutely have to. That saves a ton in operational costs over the life of the system.
So they're building this whole walled garden ecosystem around that one piece of hardware. From the IQ9 microinverter, which had that sunlight backup feature without a battery, all the way up through their IQ battery 5-piece storage system. They control the whole flow of energy.
And that advantage extends to their supply chain, too. They run a very flexible asset-light manufacturing model. They use partners like Flex and Cellcomp in places like Mexico, India, and here in the U.S.
And that flexibility was key during this downturn, right?
It was crucial. When demand just collapsed, they could scale down production really fast without having to carry the crushing fixed costs of, owning their own idle factories. That's a huge reason they've stayed profitable while a lot of their competitors have just been bleeding cash.
And you mentioned U.S. manufacturing. That ramp-up is critical.
Yeah.
The IRA's 45X tax credit. For our listeners, how structurally important is that? Are we talking about, Hundreds of millions in subsidies that just fundamentally change their cost structure.
Oh, it's hugely important. The 45X tax credit provides a pretty significant production credit per watt for components made domestically. So by ramping up their production in the US and Mexico, they're locking in these multi-year cost reductions. It lets them structurally lower their cost of goods sold.
So it's a hedge.
A massive hedge against inflation and a huge strategic advantage against global competitors who can't get those same credits.
Okay, so we've seen the strong foundation. But a solid foundation doesn't exactly stop a hurricane. Let's talk about the economic storm that hit them. That brings us to this macroeconomic crucible. I mean, why did demand collapse so violently?
It really just boils down to interest rates. Residential solar is, at its heart, a financial product. Historically, the whole sales pitch was just simple math. The monthly loan payment for your solar system was always less than what you saved on your utility bill.
A day one savings proposition. Easy sell.
Exactly. But when the federal funds rate shot up, so did solar loan APRs. We're talking 8, 9, even 11% in 2025.
And that equation just got brutally inverted.
Precisely. At those rates, the monthly loan payment now often exceeds the utility bill savings, at least for average-size systems. So the economic reason for the average middle-class buyer just disappeared overnight.
So the market shrank.
It shrank down to just cash buyers, which is
Yeah.
maybe 20% of the market, and, luxury homes with huge electricity bills.
That interest rate environment was the first hammer blow. The second was regulatory. California's NEM 3.0, which hit in April 2023. And California's, it's the single biggest market in the U.S., so this was an earthquake.
A total watershed moment. Under the old rules, California paid homeowners pretty close to retail rates for any extra power they sent back to the grid. NEM 3.0 slashed that export rate by about 75%,
Wow.
which immediately made solar-only systems economically unviable in the state.
So it forced everyone to buy storage. You have to get a battery now to store that daytime power for yourself instead of selling it to the grid for pennies.
That's right. You went from a solar system that might cost, say, $20,000 to a combined solar plus storage system that's $30,000, maybe even $40,000.
Which I guess plays to Enphase's strength since they sell the battery, but it just dramatically raises the barrier to entry.
And suppresses market volume. Exactly.
And then there was the sort of self-inflicted pain, that inventory glut in Europe that forced their undershipment strategy.
Yeah, that was market chaos just amplified by fear. During the 2022 energy crisis, after Russia invaded Ukraine, European distributors they panic bought. They hoarded massive amounts of solar equipment, fearing grid collapse, energy shortages, you name it.
And when the crisis normalized,
They were just sitting on warehouses full of Enphase products.
so Enphase made this strategic, though I'm sure painful, call to just starve the channel.
Yeah, they started a correction where their sell-in, so products they shipped to distributors, was deliberately less than the sell-through, which is what end customers were actually buying.
That clears the inventory, but it must cause massive revenue volatility.
It did. We saw their European revenue drop 38% sequentially in just one quarter, Q3 2025. And their guidance implies that recovery is going to be slow and very nonlinear.
So the market is shrinking, volatility is high. The question then becomes, how does a hardware company survive a drought this bad? Where is their resilience?
The answer is written right on their balance sheet. They built a financial fortress. They're holding $1.48 billion in cash and marketable securities. That cash pile gives them a multi-year runway to get through this downturn and, crucially, to keep funding the R&D they need for the future, like the IQ9.
That is a massive cash reserve, especially when you see their free cash flow is, just under $6 million in Q3 2025? But if the stock is trading like it's distressed, why hasn't the board forced management to be more aggressive with share buybacks? To capitalize on that price?
It's a fair challenge. Management's priority right now is liquidity, optionality. They see that cash as the ultimate strategic asset. It ensures they don't have to pull back on the multi-million-dollar R&D for the pivot we're about to talk about. It's a buffer to outlast weaker competitors.
The single most bullish data point, though, has to be their gross margin. Despite the huge collapse in volume, they reported Q3 2025 non-GAAP gross margin holding at a staggering 49.2%.
Absolutely. To maintain nearly 50% margins in a hardware business during a demand shock like this, it confirms that customers and installers still see Enphase as the premium product. They aren't just defecting based purely on price, and that's critical for their long-term moat.
However, we have to talk about the immediate risk, the critical risk factor for the near term. that Q4 tariff shock.
Yeah, this is what is going to compress earnings right now. Management guided for a new, temporary, structural step down in profitability. They called it a reciprocal tariff impact. It's linked to the battery cell supply chain.
So the tariffs hit their suppliers, who then just pass those costs back to Enphase,
Pretty much. And it's not insignificant. It's compressing their gross margin by about 500 basis points, a full 5%.
which drops their margin guidance down to the, 42 to 45% range for Q4.
Exactly. And this temporary hit is expected to last until mid-2026, when they can fully reshore more of that critical battery cell production to, mitigate the tariff cost. It definitely re-rates their near-term earnings power.
So that brings us right to the strategic pivot, the road to 2030. They can't just sit around and wait for interest rates to fall. They have to innovate their way out. And the biggest initiative there is the IQ9 Microinverter, designed to crack the commercial and industrial sector.
This is maybe the single most important part of the bull case. Historically, Enphase has been locked out of the commercial and industrial, or C&I, market because commercial buildings use 480-volt, three-phase power, and for those big arrays, centralized string inverters were just more cost-efficient.
But the IQ9 changes the economics, and it relies on a pretty fundamental tech breakthrough. Can you break down why gallium nitride GaN is such a game changer here? Is this a full platform shift?
It is a full platform shift. Think of GaN as giving the inverter like supercar acceleration and efficiency. Unlike traditional silicon, gallium nitride has a wider band gap. That lets the semiconductor switches handle much higher voltages and switch at much faster frequencies with less wasted heat.
Which translates to
Massive power density. It means the IQ9 can be far smaller and more powerful than the IQ8. It'll offer native compatibility with those 480V three-phase commercial grids.
So it lets them finally match the cost efficiency of string inverters.
In that crucial small commercial segment projects under 100 kilowatt while still keeping their safety and data advantages. And that C&I market is way less sensitive to residential credit rates. It's much needed diversification.
On the residential side, they're tackling the pressure from rivals like the Tesla Powerwall 3. And they're not doing it by competing on battery chemistry, but by focusing on installation efficiency with their upcoming 4th-gen battery.
Their focus is entirely on what's called balance of system, or BOS, reduction. For listeners, BOS is basically everything but the panels in the battery. It's the wiring, the conduit, the permits, all the extra hardware and labor. BOS can be 50% of the total project cost.
Okay, so how does the Gen 4 battery reduce that cost?
The new design integrates a meter collar and an enhanced combiner box. And crucially, this integrated design often lets the installer avoid a very expensive and time-consuming main electrical panel upgrade.
Which is common in older homes, right?
Very common in the U.S. The goal is to cut installation labor time by 2 to 3 hours. And since labor is the biggest variable cost, that helps offset the high cost of capital for the homeowner.
Beyond the hardware, the truly high-margin pivot is software. Specifically, virtual power plants, or VPPs.
VPPs are absolutely the future of their recurring revenue. It's the idea of taking thousands of home batteries, the swarm, and aggregating them into a single energy asset that utilities can tap into for grid stabilization.
And Enphase gets a cut of the fees that utilities pay for access to these, right?
Yeah.
We're already seeing these programs in Puerto Rico, Colorado, the Netherlands.
And that revenue is incredibly sticky. Once a utility integrates the Enphase VPP API into their grid management system, they are very unlikely to switch. It generates high-margin, recurring revenue that's not correlated with component sales.
Okay, now let's connect the dots to, well, the biggest topic in the news, AI. The data center explosion. Is Enphase a direct AI play?
No. We have to separate the hype from the reality here. Enphase is not a direct supplier to data centers. Their microinverters deal with low-voltage solar power. The data center power market, that's handled by industrial giants like Vertiv, Eaton, Schneider Electric.
So the connection is totally indirect. It's through the increasing strain on the electrical grid.
Exactly. The explosive growth of AI data centers is putting, almost terminal strain on the grid. Utilities have to find ways to reduce residential load to free up capacity. The solution is distributed energy resources, or DERs, which is just residential solar plus storage.
Which creates a massive macro tailwind for Enphase's VPP network.
Right. The value of their ability to manage and orchestrate all that residential power just skyrockets as the grid gets more stressed by AI.
And they're also using AI internally on the edge.
Their energy management software uses machine learning to predict solar production, forecast weather, and optimize energy flow based on dynamic utility pricing. You make sure the homeowner is maximizing their ROI automatically.
Let's talk management and sentiment. CEO Badri Kothandaraman, he's known as the guy who saved the company back in 2017. He just executed a massive, and I'm sure painful, restructuring. Cut 17% of the workforce, about 500 employees, to get costs in line with revenue.
That decision really underscores their commitment to profitability, even during a contraction. But we should note the risk. Employee morale is fragile after those layoffs. You risk brain drain, potentially losing the very R&D talent you need for the IQ9 and Gen 4 breakthroughs.
And let's address something we see online. These anecdotal reports from installers about maybe rising failure rates in the new IQ8 series and frustration over their premium pricing. How seriously is management taking that threat to their quality reputation?
Any erosion of that reliability moat is a grave risk. Enphase built its entire reputation on quality. That's what lets them charge a premium. If installers, who are the gatekeepers, lose faith, it destroys the bull case. Management knows this. Badri himself said that quality control is paramount. The premium price is only justified by superior long-term performance.
The most explicit signal management is sending right now isn't through words. It's through the CEO's own wallet.
A very strong signal. In November 2025, the CEO bought about $309,000 worth of Enphase stock on the open market. At prices just over $30 a share, this isn't stock options, this is his own cash.
So that suggests a profound conviction that the stock is deeply undervalued.
And that the strategic pivot is on track.
So wrapping up, it sounds like Enphase is really traversing the valley of despair. The layoffs, the cost-cutting, starving the channel, they were all necessary evils to preserve capital. They're innovating with the IQ9 and new batteries, but they face huge near-term volatility, especially with that Q4 tariff impact.
That is the accurate verdict. It's a high-quality asset trading at distressed sentiment levels. For the long-term listener, those with a 2 to 5 year horizon, the current $30 to $35 range is seen as an accumulation zone. It's a bet that the tariff shock subsides and the payoff arrives when the interest rate cycle finally turns in 2026, letting that IQ9 platform really ramp up.
So it is entirely tied to the macro environment and their own execution.
Which brings us to the final thought. The extreme divergence in their valuation scenarios really shows what matters most. The bear case price target is around $22.50. That assumes rates stay high and the IQ9 pivot fails. The bull case target is $122.50. That assumes rate cuts, VPP dominance, and IQ9 success.
A 400% gap.
And that gap rests almost entirely on their ability to execute this strategic pivot away from the interest rate sensitive residential market and toward commercial solar and high margin software. So the final question for you is, which future do you think their fortress balance sheet buys them the time to achieve?